Hello and welcome everybody. We'll just give people a minute or so to join here. While folks are joining, we'd just like to share a little bit more about our audience today. Looks like we have people joining us from 32 different countries, and we count a variety of different job roles from CEOs, community managers, some marketing professionals, founders, content creators, and many more. So thank you all for being with us. And of course, thank you to Eric and Brian, our wonderful guests, who will be sharing their insights shortly. So throughout the webinar, you can ask questions. I know most of us at this point are familiar with how Zoom works, but there is a Q&A box in addition to the chat. Our preference would be that you ask questions through the Q&A box so that I can moderate them later. But if you do ask questions in the chat, you might find Brian in there answering while he's speaking. We'll do our best to answer everything at the end of the session, but if we're not able to get to everything, we'll follow up with emails after the webinar. So without further ado, let's do some introductions here. My name is Mitch Howe. I'm a customer success manager here at Hivebrite, working closely with clients to help them achieve their community goals and objectives and really, make those communities hum. Before I was at Hivebrite, I worked in IBM's Watson marketing organization, as well as a MarTech company called Acoustic. And prior to that, I was in customer success at an ad tech unicorn called Simplify. And I also spent some time working in college athletics. Joining me today is Erica Kuhl. Erica has over 18 years of enterprise community expertise. She was formerly VP of community at Salesforce, where she built their entire community from scratch, from strategy and programs to metrics and ROI. She really understands running community programs on any size budget and with any size team, big or small. She saw massive growth in the company at Salesforce, started when there were about 175 employees, and was there up through, employee 49,000. So she really has adapted strategies to deeply understand the challenges that a company might face at any stage. Now she's ventured out on her own to help companies like Slack, Zendesk, Atlassian, Google Cloud, and GitHub build robust community strategies and programs with her expertise, authentic approach, and trusted services. Also with us is Brian Oblinger. He has over 20 years of experience in the industry and has launched and contributed to the success of hundreds of communities, including Acer, Alteryx, Autodesk, Comcast, eBay, Hewlett-Packard, and PlayStation. Sorry, that's Sony PlayStation. He also co-hosts a podcast with Erica called In Before the Lock, where he shares his experiences and free resources to help community professionals succeed. If you're not familiar with it, I really recommend that you check it out. And then by day, Brian provides strategic community consulting to brands across the world. So Erica, Brian, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in here. We'll toss you a softball right off the bat. How can an online community unlock a competitive advantage for an organization, and why today is that more important than it's ever been before?
Take it away, Erica.
I was going to say, that's you. You got to go, Brian. Come on. It's always you first.
Well, yeah. So look, I think this used to be not the case, right? I think that people really had a hard time understanding, why community, what's the value? How do we measure it? How do we map it to business goals? All of those things. I think in the last, let's say 5 to 10 years, we've come a long way. And I think part of it is because we've just been doing it longer and we've gotten better at it, and we've gotten better at measuring and telling the story. And what those measurements now tell us is that people that join and engage in communities are often more likely to buy faster, learn your product, learn faster and better. If you're, some sort of software company or something, there's expansion, there's retention. If you're a retail brand, there's, just across the board, right? Whatever kind of business you are, there's some sort of advantage for you there and tangible results. And I think we're now seeing in this kind of modern world we're in that the companies that have communities and have invested in them significantly tend to outperform their competitors in the same industry. So I think at this point it's less of a surprise than it is, we just need to tell that story and make sure people really understand it.
Yeah, I think it's adding a unique value too than traditional marketing organizations maybe are used to. It's so when you have a thriving, robust community and you explain the value, being able to extract success stories and quotes and referenceability just becomes more natural. And it's just about helping marketing understand this new way of thinking. Also, I think that it's been great to see marketing organizations loosen up a bit on the tightness of the brand and expanding the brand to be owned a little bit more by the customer, because that's what they're expecting now. Customers expect to be owners of the brand and driving that forward. So being able to put some of that emphasis on the customer, let them really help you drive the brand has been a new and exciting thing. And that's really where community can supercharge things, at least I think. And, I come from a Salesforce background, as you heard from Mitch's great introduction from me, and they are historically and always and still are an amazing marketing organization. And the brand is extremely important to Salesforce. So it was an evolution. I started in marketing there, and they did not understand me. They did not understand what I was doing. And they were uncomfortable with what I was doing because it didn't exactly match to pipeline generation in the more traditional senses, but it came full circle over the course of time. And like Brian said, in the last 5 years, and I'd say, even at Salesforce in the last 7 years, really understanding how it can expand the footprint of marketing in an incredible way, going from how incredible the events are that they run, unbelievable, but then saying, okay, well, let's layer on all the community driven events. And now we have this huge footprint and a really distributed, extremely powerful ecosystem. So it's been fun to watch, I think, the changes that have gone on in organizations and the partnership now marketing and community at Salesforce is in lockstep. It's a core part of the way they do business now. And I love seeing that. And I love seeing organizations moving that direction.
So Erica, I think, sorry, Brian. I think you've hit on something great. And it leads to kind of my next question is, when you said that Salesforce marketing organization didn't understand you, what were you doing to ensure that you in the community aligned with marketing's goals, and, tell that story and kind of what does success look like, and how did you know you would have reached it?
Yeah, it's hard because it's flashing back in time, and I don't actually think, well, I guess that's not true. I do think these are still some of the challenges that people have, but I'm thrilled, and I agree with Brian that it's really evolved. So some of the challenges that I had back in the day, in the dinosaur days of my early days at Salesforce, they a lot of time don't exist. But let's just say that it is a very important thing that still continues, which is aligning with the goals of the organization. That is still absolutely tantamount, and is something Brian and I talk about. And if you are and have listened to our podcast, you will never hear an episode of us not talking about alignment with goals and building your strategy aligned to the goals of either the organization or the company as a whole. But so that is what I did, is I knew that even if I didn't feel like my core value of the community was aligned to marketing's lead generation, I knew they had extra goals and other things I could align with. So I made certain that it was aligned with brand awareness and customer marketing values and bringing customers forefront into the messaging. That was always something that was important to Salesforce, still is customer first. And so I could figure out a way to source and unlock value with customers so quickly that they never were able to do before by having an engaged community. So I pivoted some of my goals to be that, but I still made certain that I was still pushing forward on what the core values of I thought the community were, which is, self-service, scale, and connections and networking, and all of the retention and the adoption goals as well. But I made certain that while I was in marketing, I had those core alignment, and that's how I gained traction and showed value even in the early days when pipe gen was not my core value. So I found other ones that made sense to the business acumen of marketing, and I leaned into those early days.
Okay. And Brian, from listening to the podcast you guys did a few months ago on this topic, I know that you haven't always been the biggest fan of marketing in the community. So if you were talking to the marketers on the call, how would they align with your goals?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by saying, I used to work for a CEO who used to say that customer trust defined the integrity of our company. And we know from all of the data and surveys that we've done over the years that peers trust their peers more than they do companies, right? So when we think about marketing and our goals are, hey, we want to, it's demand gen, it's lead gen, it's pipeline, it's, number of attendees at a conference or webinar, those kinds of things, the question becomes, how can we both help you solve those challenges from a community perspective, but do so in a way that fosters that peer connection and that trust and that authenticity, right, is the word that we like to use. And so I think what you used to see, again, like a decade ago, this wasn't like yesterday, is that marketing teams desperate to fill their pipeline with leads would sort of say, well, what other sources are there around the company where I can go like shove my stuff, to like get as can. And of course, community became a target for that because, hey, here's 50,000 people, here's 1 million people, whatever in the community. And so it was just sort of like a ham-fisted way of doing it. Now, fast forward to today, we do tend to have better alignment. And I think most marketing organizations, to their credit, have totally come around to the idea of we need to be authentic, we need to be real, like we shouldn't, come at people all the time with this stuff. How do we actually connect with them? And that's a better way to market and a better way to sell. So I think in general, we're just way more aligned than we used to be. And it's much more of a partnership. And I think we kind of have to let go of whatever happened in the past and, not worry so much about who did what when in 2007, because it doesn't matter, right? And so that's really my goal in working with, companies and clients and marketing departments is, what are your goals? How do we accomplish them? And how do we work together so that there's value flowing in both directions? And I think Erica would agree when we're able to get that kind of symbiosis, everybody wins, right? And life is good. And ultimately what really matters out of all of this is that the prospect or the customer is happier and we've made their decision easier. And that's ultimately, the real goal.
Yeah, I think it's so fun to see now, or what I think is achieving a goal beyond everything that Brian said, is when you start hearing that having an engaged community or an engaged ecosystem drives the sale. Like that is when it's like those ultimate success, when it's so built into the DNA of the company that, you stack up these two products or services or whatever you're trying to sell, and they say, well, I can see and touch and taste and visit all of the amazingness of this one. And even if this one's slightly better, it doesn't even matter because I know I'm going to get value from it, so fast because of this engaged population. And so it's helping the organization understand how they can leverage the power of community at every stage. And I think marketing loves that. I mean, it markets for them. I absolutely hate that term. And I used it at Salesforce and it made me nuts, but it is kind of true at the end of the day that's having your customers market for you is so powerful. And that's what Brian said, is that people are used to that now in everything that they do in their life. They're accustomed to going to their peers. And so giving them that ability to do that at scale and on their own without the company around their shoulder, like peaking it or facilitating it, like those days I think are over of like match this reference with this reference. It's like build a community and they'll do that for you, and they'll do that on their own authentic time. And they'll seek out the people. You just have to make it easy for them to do that. So I think that's really another added value, is just when it ends up driving the sale.
That's great. So let's pivot a little bit to kind of learning from mistakes that you guys have made in your career.
Do you have hours? Like, how long is this webinar?
Any pitfalls to avoid when collaborating with other business teams, really, whether it's marketing or any other team in the organization, I know we've got a bunch of marketers on the line, but if you've got a really juicy story of failure, we can tell those too.
Erica, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm like, which one do I choose? I mean, yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of failures that I've had over the year, but a lot of them just come down to not communicating the value early enough. I just think that, I don't like to surprise people. And I've done that in the past where I've gone off and done something which I thought was perfectly harmless, and it can feel harmful. So starting, for instance, user group programs. If you're familiar with what a user group program is, that is generally speaking, at least it was at Salesforce, and how I build them now is customer run events. And you enable them with, the information and the content, and then they run the event on your behalf. And it's a really wonderful thing. But flashing back to what I said before about Salesforce being very brand focused, that can feel uncomfortable if they are off brand. And so this is not like a huge failure, but it is a failure in any sense that they visited the community and they saw our user group page, and it was filled with all sorts of different logos and versions of our logos. And it unnecessarily sent our marketing organization through the roof. And it's like, for me, I was like, I don't understand. Who cares how you use the cloud or the color or the lockup or whatever? I was like, that didn't matter to me, but it does matter to a company's brand. And I get that. So what I maybe should have done or could have done is gone to them and said, here's the deal. This is what we're doing. Pitch them on the idea of what a customer run event is, and then help me give parameters in which I can work from. Instead of it just spun. And then they actually reached out to those leaders and started telling them to pull these things down. And that is not good across the board. And I understand what they were doing. Their IP, it's legal, it's marketing, I get it. But I could have done a better job, and I did a better job going forward of understanding, okay, here's what they are. Here's the value they bring to the organization. Give me some wiggle room in which they can work with, and let's work together with this. Let's not go directly to the customer. So, I mean, I could go on and on about this because this was a perpetual problem I had, because it just the scale in which I was working with. But that's the first failure I could think of. And it just was unnecessary. It could have impacted the customer and the business. And I could have done a better job in that. And now I know what to do.
Awesome.
Over to you, Brian. What failures do you have queued up?
Yeah, I mean, I think, some of the common ones to avoid that I've certainly made, in the past is, the argument over ownership, I think, becomes a real challenge, where we focus on that instead of who owns this thing and who's ultimately responsible, and all of that gets in the way of what value are we delivering for prospects and customers, right? So that's a distraction to avoid. I've done that. Hi. The other one that I talk about all the time is sort of like tangible advice for people on the call here is, showing up at the other person's door and only talking about yourself and what you need out of this relationship, right? So if I'm a community professional and I show up in the CMO's office, the first thing out of my mouth should not be, we're building this community, we're going to do this, we'll let you on board, if you want to. It should be, hey, what are your challenges? What are you trying to solve? What problems do you have? What measurements, how do you measure yourself? Which I know we're going to answer because Jeffrey asked it in the questions, right? That I want to know about what they're trying to solve and really come at this from a partnership perspective, not a, hey, I own this platform and I'll let you ride if you pay for the ticket, right? And you see that a lot across a lot of organizations, kind of that like political sparring and whatnot. And a lot of those things are barriers that just get in your way and really make this a lot harder than it has to be. So that's my recommendation, I guess, for everybody on the line, and, mistakes that I've certainly made along the way. And then those, kind of had tentacles, right? Like, so if you do those wrong, it affects everything else that you do with marketing in terms of, hey, we need to partner on the, remember conferences when we used to like get on airplanes and go to in-person shows? Hey, we want a community booth, right? Well, you've sort of colored that now with the negativity of the other things you've done. So start the relationship the right way, or reconcile it if it's, in a bad place. Because there's so many different ways we can work together, and it would just be a shame, right, if we spend all of our time kind of arguing about petty things that don't matter. Again, the prospect and the customer has to be the North Star here, and we kind of need to get over ourselves, really to make that work.
I'd love to add one thing to that, because I think that's so brilliant. And I think one thing that I've made mistakes in the past is that I think I'm so important, and I think what I have to share is so important. And I have blinders on. And I think people have this occasionally too. And then you go, to Brian's point, you go up to the CMO and you storm in, and they're in the middle of like 10,000 other more important things. It really, truly, and it's not, you're going to ruin your chances if you don't understand the business they're going through. You may not be even in marketing. So you need to understand everything that's going on to fit yourself in a really seamless way. So if you want something, understand where they are, all the things that are going on, and fit yourself in seamlessly to make their life better. So if it is a huge conference and you do want something, understand the challenges and pains they're going through, and how what you want to do is going to make it better or easier. So I just think that I've made that mistake where I think I'm so important, and I go in guns blaring, and they're like, go away. Like, we have a 150,000 person conference that's going to be happening in a month. Like, you need to go away. So I think this is important. Is really, we say this all the time about understanding business acumen. It's not something that communities people have always in their hip pocket, but you got to get better, and you have to learn it, and you understand what matters to marketing, what matters to product, what matters to support, and speak their language, and then come in with that. So I've made that mistake for sure.
That's great. And Brian, to another point you had made on the podcast, I'm going to keep plugging this, because if people want more of this conversation after we're done, there's a lot more of it on the podcast. I think it was episode 30. But it's not just not getting that booth at a conference, right? It can be something a lot bigger, like being relegated to the other resources tab on the website when you want the community tab to be front and center.
Or not at all.
Or
or
not at all.
So. That's so true.
So let's say, we have a thriving community, and you don't have a great relationship with marketing, but you're willing to take that step and invite them in. How do you help marketing show the value and tell the stories of success that are in the community and of the community?
Yeah, I mean, back to what I was saying before, you got to start by speaking their language, right? What do you care about? What are you trying to accomplish? What are the words you use to describe those things? And then how do I come with solutions and say, okay, out of the 10 core problems you're trying to solve this year or this quarter or whatever it is, here's the 3 where I think we can have a material impact together if we, build up some shared goals and share our resources and work together. And so I think it sounds simple, but it's really hard to do, because I'm not a marketer, they're not a community person. So we really have to work hard to bridge that gap. And I think, kind of coming at the end of the day, I can come with a bunch of metrics and analytics and numbers about, what we measure in community and why we think they're valuable. But if I can't actually tell the story of how those map in a meaningful way to those 3 goals that we're trying to help them solve, then I've failed, right? And this is what you see most often in a lot of organizations when, Eric and I show up and we start asking questions about, how do you measure yourself? How do you know that what you're doing is working? We get a lot of blank stares. We get a lot of, gigantic spreadsheets with what I like to call voodoo math. Stuff that just sort of like, we're just making stuff up here. And that's where we try to start to untangle the web a little bit and say, okay, let's make this something simple that you can walk into an executive meeting or, whatever the venue is and say, we're generating leads. The leads we get from community are way higher quality than the ones we get from anywhere else. Go figure. We've also generated, this much influence in the market. We've raised this much brand awareness. We've, on down the line, right? What are those? And you'll notice those are not, I'm not talking about page views and number of posts. I'm giving you the high level business marketing metrics. And so for me, that's, what I try to do. And I tend to find that works best.
Yeah. And I mean, I also think some tangible things that, so yes, 1,000% yes to all of that. And then some other just like smaller tangible things that I try to test out with marketing in early days to get them to really understand or prove it. Because sometimes they're like, yeah, but sometimes not sometimes, they always need to see it to believe it. And so some things that I wrote down while Brian was talking is, understanding that what they can do is help drive growth and vice versa. So go back to those user group meetings, for example. Those user group meetings, one of the toughest things they have is they can drive growth because you own the growth. The brand has access to the customer base. They don't. So all they can do is meet with the people that they have, and they can have this great content and this great engagement, but they can't build their momentum. And so saying to your good old marketing organization, understanding that what Brian said is that when we find people attend these events, or they are more successful with community, they buy more product and they stay longer. What you can do is help me drive people to those events. And what you could do to help drive people to those events is do it in these specific ways. Do it at onboarding, or do it at events, or like on the login page, or wherever the case may be. So give them very like pointed things that then point to the metrics that they're going to do, and then tell them what happened. Like, hey, listen, you did that promo, and because we've never done this before, you generated X% growth in that user group or those user groups. And that's amazing. So they love growth numbers. They love jumping, and you have to be careful because user groups tend to be smaller, and marketing organizations, at least like Salesforce, love big, huge numbers. So I never did it like it went from 40 to 50 people, because that's like, whoa, small potatoes. But I did percentages. Like, you drove 25% growth at that user group meeting by doing that thing. So that's a tangible thing that I did early days to just create the constant prioritization of that growth. And then another thing that I think is really great to show proof and value is blogs and content. It tends to be the case that customers, when they're featured, or customer middle funnel content performs extremely well. When you have a customer doing a best practice or a feature, like it just went through the roof at least at Salesforce. And they are so focused on top of the funnel content generally. Again, talking about Salesforce or some other companies that are very marketing driven. And then we would measure the impact of that middle funnel content or that customer, and how easy it was to get them to tell their story, and then show just like stack up, here's the blogs that performed, and here's this one, it just went through the roof. Because you've also got not only this great customer content generated by them, but they also love it. So they spread it and they share it, and all all the community members jump on top of it. And so it's just like extra juice to show the power of community. So I did, those are just like two tangible things I think that can really help marketing understand how they can participate with community.
I think the scale thing is so important, Erica, because whether you're a tiny company with 10 people, what are they worried about? How are we going to get our message out, right? We're this small company. We don't have all the money in the world to advertise and do all these things, right? These type of community events are one way to do that. On the other end of the spectrum, we're one of the biggest companies in the world, and we need to reach as many people as, the problem stays the same, regardless of scale. And so I think, when I talk to marketing at any company, at any size, trying to do anything, or you're an association or whatever, it's like, this can help you scale how you message to people in a way that, it's not the 90s anymore, right? We're not spending $2 million on a Super Bowl ad. So how else are we going to do this? Well, community could be one way to fill in that part of the strategy.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Just real quick, how do you make sure that you're not asking your community for too much?
That was a good one. I think this is about education. I think that people have a tendency to not understand community inherently within the organization, and being able to focus on enablement and understanding throughout the organization how they can get the most out of the community and what that means is a big key one, because I think they want to get involved, but they don't know how. And so they'll inherently go in there and just like talk at them or push content or do megaphone style stuff, especially marketing. And it's really important to train and teach people how to do this. I always use the example, because not to completely date myself, but I was in existence in the world and at a company pre-social. And that was the same kind of thing. Like, people didn't know how to do social. They didn't know how to engage and what to say and how, what that even looked like. So it's the same kind of enablement that you did then of like social media guidelines and what's inbounds and out of bounds and how do you engage so you can feel comfortable when you do so and protected. So I think that that's a really important piece. If you let it go, thanks, Brian. If you let it go, then it can turn into a place where you are asking too much and you are pushing out too much or expecting too much in return. So I always also talk about the fact that it's their home. The best communities that I've ever seen are owned by the community. They feel like they're owned by the community. And I say, you're visiting their home. You would not come into someone's home and just be like opening the fridge and taking out the food. You'd wait for them to graciously welcome you, build that trust, and then more and more get comfortable, and then it starts to become an interactive engagement. So I like to treat it that way and explain these different things. And I think it is your responsibility to teach people how to get the most out of it. Yeah, Brian, what do you think?
I mean, that's a not so subtle jab at me from when I come over to Erica's house and eat all her food, but whatever.
You did just call her a dinosaur, so.
I mean, she did. He did.
It's all fair.
It's true.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's exactly right about this. I would say, someone has to be the arbiter of authenticity and kind of customer experience at your company, right? And I don't think it matters so much where that person lives or what their title is or anything like that. But when we think about, like you said, what are we asking of our community versus what are we giving them in return? And what is that exchange? There will always be that exchange, to some level, but we have to keep it balanced or even or in a position where people don't feel like they're, like, let me put it this way. One of the hardest tricks to pull off in a community is to market and sell to people without them feeling like they're being marketed and sold to. And that requires a really clear vision of how much is too much, how much is okay, where should things go? Can we do this in a way that feels good while also advancing our goals for, content distribution, or like product marketing, for example, is one where this typically comes up of like, what feels like education versus I'm just trying to get you to buy more stuff. And so having that mentality of how do we make that, would we want this? If I was in this community or I was following you on Twitter or whatever the channel is, would I want this in my feed or would I want to consume this? And if the answer is no, then we shouldn't do it, right? And we should go back to the kind of drawing board and figure out how do we rewrap this messaging or this content or whatever it is we're trying to do in a way that actually gives value first back to the community. And then if we do that well, they'll buy some stuff, right? Or they'll make members longer, or they'll subscribe, or like whatever your goal is there. It's really kind of setting aside our, like I said before, our impulsive need to generate more leads and those things, and think about it from the aspect of how do I provide you value? And I feel like if I do that, then our numbers will take care of themselves.
I have something I jotted down because I was like, I can't forget to say this, because this is, I think, a huge point to add on to what Brian's saying about thinking about value, is that one of the biggest challenges that I see trying to work with marketing and understanding community is it is a slower roll. It is going to be a longer tail value. It is going to provide more value and all the things Brian said, which is, more loyal customers staying with you longer, adopting your product better, generating bigger, more upsell, cross-sell, whatever the case may be, but it is slower. And it is important to understand. I work with marketing organizations all the time where they're accustomed to throwing an event and it generates this thing and it's done. And now we move on, and it's not going to be like that. So it's very important to set the expectation that you will get it but you have to do these things and it will be slower. Otherwise, it's going to set everybody up for failure because they're going to expect that quick hit, and it's not going to come right away. But you have to put in the time, and then you will reap the benefits. That's something that's I think that's newer for marketing organizations, and it isn't just about events. You know, there's other ways to generate that. So I think that's something that they want, and I have to constantly scale that back and work against the tide when it comes to this. So I just wanted to make sure that I said that.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it's a great segue into the last question I have for you guys.
Great.
How do you see the relationship with marketing and community evolving kind of in that short term, you know, over the next 6 months to a year, and then longer term over, you know, 24, 36 months?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think what I'm seeing, and Erica, you can check me on this, is I'm working with more marketing departments and chief marketing officers and VPs of demand gen and whatever than I ever have before, right? So if you think about even just 4 or 5 years ago, communities were largely driven by support, success, you know, kind of those classic use cases, right? And as I said, as marketing teams have sort of come to understand the authenticity and trust and sort of peer authenticity pieces, they've also made this shift. And so now we're more aligned. And I find that I think probably over half of my clients right now, I'm working out of marketing, right? So I think that's the good news, is that it's kind of come around full circle here. We align really well. We work well together. I think we speak a pretty similar language at this point on a lot of things. And so I think in the near term, I would expect to see more of that. And in the long term, I would expect to see, you know, even more of that. I think as, you know, CMOs kind of dig into this, and we're seeing that more often, right, Erica, where there's people in marketing that have like community marketing is like their title. Right? So there's a recognition that what I'm saying is true by way of, I've actually created structure in my org for people to do that job. I think is a really big step and something I, you know, hope we see more of.
Yeah, I see that too. And I think you're right. I think more than half the clients I work with, marketing is in our communities in marketing, which for me, Mitch, like at the beginning when I said I was in marketing, building the community and like couldn't wait to build a tunnel to get out. And now this is what's happening. Is it blows my mind, and it really excites me about the future, because the innovative CMOs, they get this just inherently. They've generally come from somewhere where they saw value with community, and then they bring it with them. And I'm like, I love this. It's so great. And it's so innovative. The most innovative CMOs understand that you have to allow for other metrics as well, beyond just what's in the marketing organization. They look at it as a service to the company. And they allow for that ability to sign up to serve other parts of the organization, along with obviously marketing specifically. And like Brian's saying, like I'm starting to see structures around customer marketing becoming this, either only this or this, and advocacy and referrals are all starting to come together under one umbrella, either called customer marketing or called community marketing, where community is this broad umbrella and these things ladder up. It's so exciting to me to see this. And I think those are historically things you have to try to work really hard to keep aligned, so they don't gobble up one another, or they don't start to feel like complete separate, complete silos. And so putting these together and understanding that it is the same customer, and you're giving them all sorts of different ways to engage with your brand under one umbrella called customer marketing. I just think it's so fabulous. Like, I think the ways of customer marketing are gone. I mean, they're just like on their way out. And I mean, we project all the time about different things, and then we always love like to think about a year later what it's going to end up being. But I've always felt really passionate about things like referrals, and I've always said that's just the most dated and boring way to do referrals, is the way that it's being done right now. And I'm like waiting for this to be disrupted. And I think the more that marketing organizations really lean into community, the ways in which they do referrals can just totally change too. So it's kind of this cascading effect that will happen, and the way that they run loyalty programs or advocacy or champions, they start to feel like they're all interconnected. And that's really exciting to me. And then the conversations that we're having, like you said, Mitch, getting community on a navigation, it just shouldn't even be. I don't think it's going to be a problem in a year. If I'm projecting in the future, it's going to be like, if you don't have that, who are you? You know, and that's going to be the future. I hope. I'm dreaming kind of. But so as people start to recreate and reimagine their customer marketing functions, then it's going to have this really incredible feeling, I think, for the company. So those are some of the things that I'm seeing. Yeah, it's pretty. I think that's pretty exciting. I think we're probably more than a year away from that, but I'm dreaming that maybe it's a year.
I think that makes sense. And I mean, just in my experience, I've seen some different kind of trickle, breadcrumbs for the next 5 years. I think it's one of the car companies has a customer marketing organization or person in recruiting, because they figured out that, hey, if you have a terrible experience through a recruiting process looking for a job, you're a lot less likely to buy a car from them. So just all of these different pieces of the organization really are connected, and it is one big community, not just the silos that we traditionally think of.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And we Brian and I collaborated on a slide that we both use all the time about the integrated experience of community, because still people think community lives over in this little corner. Like, go to the community. It's like those words I don't even ever want to hear, because it's like it should be part of the flow, like you're saying, all the way through. And it should feel personal, the way that they flow in and out of community when it's relevant to them. Not just like go to the generic community. It's like when they're in a learning moment, go. When they're in a recruiting moment, go. When they're, there's all these different really organic ways it should flow into your customer journey. And if it's just this thing off to the side, it's not doing what it needs to do. And so marketing has a whole lot to do with that customer journey, journey mapping or whatever. It should just not be an afterthought. It's like, just what is the call to action to community at every stage? Because there is absolutely, in my mind, a call to action at every stage. That I can't think of one where you're like, yeah, you wouldn't want to go to community for that. It's like you want to go to community for that, for everything. So that's, I think, what we see.
All right. Well, just looking at the time, I think we can start answering some questions. And if you're out there and still do have a question, throw that in the Q&A box. The first one, I think, really ties into what we were just talking about. So beyond marketing teams, are there other units that community teams should be looking to collaborate and build?
Yay. We love this question.
Other than all of them, do you have a priority list, or what's most successful?
Well, I can't possibly say this without saying you have to align with your business goals and you have to have a strategy. I just you have to say that. But, when that's the case, I think the core ones that I focus on that can get the biggest value from community and vice versa are the product organization. From an innovation perspective, co-collaborating on roadmaps or all the things, ideas for your product. They also want to hear from product managers generally, like meeting the makers behind. So that's a great one. Support is obviously a huge one, because even if you're not a support community, they're going to ask questions about your product. And so it's best to collaborate with your support organization, how they can plug in. Customer success, huge one. They are usually needing to support at scale, even if it's small scale, it's moving to large, and they want adoption, they want attrition, whatever their numbers are, that's huge. So those are my three others beyond marketing those are my go-tos when it comes to it.
It's a pretty good list. I mean, I think the, kind of classic consulting example answer to this question is,
It depends.
Right? Because the reality is, I'm fond of saying, people will say like, where should we start our community, or where should it live, or who should, what? And the answer is wherever it has the best chance to survive at the beginning. Right?
Yeah.
So for a lot of companies that might be support, for a lot of companies that might be product, for some companies that might be marketing. Right. And so I don't try to presume, I guess, which ones to do or which order to do them in. I just know that we want to do them all, but that we probably can't do them all at the same time. And so it comes down to a matter of prioritization and saying, hey, this particular company, it kind of feels like marketing is the first use case. And then maybe later on we add in product or something like that. It's all over the board and everybody kind of does this in different ordering. But what I do think is important, I sort of joke when I say all of them, but I also really mean that, which is, a lot of companies and organizations are leaving a lot of money and value on the table by not bringing in all of the things Erica just mentioned, right? And so when you look at, people say, well, like, give me an example of a successful community and then tell me why. I'm always going to point you at like Salesforce, Alteryx, Anaplan, things like this, Tableau, right? And they say, well, why is that? And it's like, because they have everything, right? And so no matter what someone's coming there to do, whatever their mission or their purpose or their need in that moment, there's something for them, right? Oh, I can give my product idea. I can get support. I can read some product marketing stuff. I can, learn more about this new subscription you have, whatever it is. The really great communities have invested a lot of time and money in building out all the use cases. It's really hard to do. But I think if that's, a goal you set for yourself in the long term, 5 years, plus whatever, then you can build something really special. So all of them is the answer.
Brian, this isn't a question in the Q&A, but it made me think of something that I think is really important. How do you identify and tap into kind of those power users in the community, the people who spend the most time there, who answer the most questions? What are some things that you can try to get out of them that companies aren't asking for yet?
Well, I mean, I think it's usually an acceleration of what they're already doing, right? So, because again, they have different motivations. Some of them are interested in, hey, I'll come and speak at an event like this. Other people are terrified of that and they will never do that, right? So understanding what their various motivation sets are and what they care about and what are the drivers of engagement for them is really important. And then you have a menu of things where you say, hey, maybe you come speak for us. Maybe you write a guest blog. Maybe you lead a user group. Maybe you come be a guest on our podcast, right? Like, I think when I was at Alteryx, we had a list of like 55 or 60 different activities like that, where we just put it in front of people and said, hey, we think these might be what you want, but pick off the menu and tell us. And again, it's not about what we're getting out of them. Obviously, we're going to benefit and there's value, but it's more, what can I do for you, right? What do you care about? Do you want to, sort of level up your career by way of being more present in the industry? Cool. We have a bunch of options to do that. Do you care about just being known as the greatest technical user of this product of all time? Great. We can help you do that too. So I think for me, it's, understanding their motivations, tying those to specific activities, giving them those opportunities, and really making it more about them and the value they're getting. Because again, we know that if we do that, we're going to get all this content. They're going to lead a group. Like, they're going to do all this stuff for us, right? But what I don't want to do is fatigue them and sort of present this image of like, yeah, you work for me now for free. Because that's when, that's not a good relationship, right? And those are the people that ultimately, after a month or two, they're going to burn out of doing that. And now you've lost them forever when you could have had this really long, great, fruitful relationship for the both of you.
I think that's a great answer. So we got a couple questions here about metrics, and I assume you're going to throw that consulting answer at me that it depends. But the first one we've got here, outside of things like content development, testing, feedback, brand building, and referrals, what are some of the KPIs and metrics that community teams can tangibly and impactfully lead with and deliver to marketing teams?
Erica, cool.
I was going to say just specifically to marketing teams, because I don't really ever think about it just to that. But yeah, I think that marketing cares about the big business goals. And so what I generally think about is cross-sell, upsell is a huge one. Loyalty and retention is something that marketing, I feel like they all care about this, even if it's not like their primary focus, but there's definitely ways in which you can make strong correlation to these big business goals that they care about. And it's just a matter of understanding your foundational baseline of like engaged versus not engaged, and then what data sets you pull. I mean, you have to do the work, and it's not just about the data, it's about the story you tell behind the data, as we've always said. But I think that, you know, some of the big ones, if I'm just rattling them off, are definitely have a correlated set of deals that come in. You can definitely have a correlated impact on the size of the deal. So like how big the deal is, a correlated impact to maybe product adoption is not so marketing related, but loyalty and retention and keeping customers longer. Those are all things that I work all the time with customers to try to lay that foundation. Now you don't get to do that right away. Those are, like I said, a little longer tail, but yeah, you should be able to pull that. You should be able to correlate those big business ones along with all of the other health metrics that you can get out of a community that are very, very critically important that lead to that, about, you know, a number of members coming back, how long they're spending, you know, what they're doing on there, and all the metrics that you would expect. So I think all of those are important metrics to marketing. And if they're not, that's interesting to me. I don't know why they wouldn't want to know those metrics.
Yeah, I mean, I think marketing teams often talk about influence and attribution, right? So great, let's do that. And I think just comparing the deltas of people who visit the community versus those who don't, and matching them up to those metrics Erica just mentioned, gives you a pretty good picture. It's not perfect. Correlation does not always mean causation, but it does give you the trends and the ability to kind of say, hey, look, we know that this is working, and we know that there's been an impact and what that looks like. And at the end of the day, every business cares about three things, right? We generated revenue, we kept that revenue, you know, or we saved costs, right? And so in marketing, maybe they don't care so much about the cost savings, but they definitely care about that we generated revenue and then we kept what we had, or we expanded it, right? And so the question becomes, how do you sort of take those high level, you know, knowing that every company in the world cares about all three of those things, how do we bring that down a level and say, okay, you know, how are we going to measure this? How are we going to present it? What is the number? How are we saying that we're contributing to the generation, or the cost savings, or the expansion, or whatever? That's the story you can tell, right, to leadership at your company. And then they go, oh, now I get why we're doing this. Can I invest more, right? And then instead of having conversations about how much community costs and why are we doing this, all of a sudden you're having conversations about, hey, you gave me $100,000 and I turned it into $3 million. Imagine what would happen if you gave me $1 million, right?
Yeah.
It's a completely different conversation to have in the business. And it sets you up for a world where you just went from being a cost center to one of the most valuable things that your company does.
Yeah. I look at it like you can set it up almost like a formula, like exactly what Brian's saying. Like, here's what I did with this. And if you crank it to 11, here's what I can do. Like it should almost be formulaic at that point. But I think there's a lot of value, and I don't think it's exactly in the like metrics bucket, but there is so much value internally too. When I think about, you know, organizations, like how quickly they can tap into feedback, how quickly they can vet a strategy, how they can keep themselves on the right path. There's also these intangible metrics that should not be forgotten, that are so powerful to a community internal to an organization, that they aren't just like correlated value to, you know, the ROI, but it's just invaluable to have this engaged population of people that can keep you and course correct you and send feedback directly to you on not just your product, but your processes and, you know, all of the things I've seen. And I think that then does correlate to value and loyalty. If they've got an investment in having a channel to provide you direct feedback, it just has this incredible value to keeping your customers happy. So I think that, there's always going to be you have to come up with the tangible metrics, but you have to not forget about the intangible metrics as well, and somehow try to build that into your story. Otherwise, it's just, Brian, I'm going to say the word, you're going to over-rotate. This is a word I don't make it through a session without saying over-rotate. You're going to over-rotate to thinking about metrics and forget about the work you need to do about some of the intangibles as well.
It's a
vibe. So I don't see any other questions in the chat. So I want to wrap with one that I get asked at least once a week. I want each of you to give me just one quick hit thought. We could go on for hours on this, but one quick hit thought on how to improve engagement within your community.
One.
Well, you just waved the magic wand, right, Mitch? I mean, that's
yeah.
I think, so I'll try to make this as short as I possibly can, but yeah, this is like a 4-hour topic. I think when it comes to engagement, that word actually needs to be broken out into 7 other things, right? When we say engagement, what do we mean? Well, we're trying to build better content, where we want this metric or that metric to improve. What does engagement actually mean, I think, is really important to understand before you even embark on this process. And then I go back to what I said about kind of the super user side. Is the same is true of all members or all of your audience, which is understanding what do they care about, what do they need to succeed, and what's ultimately going to be valuable to them. And the trap that people fall into with engagement is they just want the number, and they think the way to get there is just to blast out a bunch of stuff and flood the zone effectively, right? But none of it's valuable to people, because it's all about us and our perspective and who we are and why you should buy our product or whatever. And that's not interesting to people, right? What's interesting to people is, I'm going to help you solve your problem, right? And here's how. I have a solution. And so again, they wonder why. How come we've been building all this content and our engagement isn't going up? Because it's crap, right? Like, build content for people that's going to deliver them an actual solution or value or knowledge they didn't have before. And then you have a good chance of seeing engagement, go up, and whatever that means to you.
Yeah, I think we say often, like, engagement for engagement's sake. It's like it's pointless. And I think that they get really caught up in, like Brian's saying, big numbers, when that's not the way a good community grows. It's about starting unscalable and doing the hard work to really understand the problems you're trying to solve. And some of that early smaller engagement then begets larger engagement down the line. So it's not just the sexy big numbers. You can't jump that step. You just cannot. There's nothing you can do to jump that step. And so that's about expectation setting again, and just unfortunately saying, this is the way it's going to be. I promise you, if we follow these steps, I promise you, if we constantly have a dialogue with our community members, however small it is, that will lead to larger numbers down the line. But just large engagement doesn't mean success. Like, it's just like that shouldn't be your just ultimate goal.
Well,
that's like,
the way I present this to people, Mitch, is like, so play out the scenario, right?
Yeah.
So you have a meeting with your CEO or your CMO, right? And you're going to come in and give the update about what you're doing in community and the value. Okay. And you come in and you say, we had 5,000 engagements last month. Who cares? I don't know what that means. Like, what does that mean? Is that good? Is that bad? Did we go up? Did we go down? Is that hitting our target? The story around, hey, we increased our engagement, but to what end, right? Like we were saying before, well, now we're getting better leads, or we're generating more revenue, or we're, increasing our thought leadership in the industry. If you can't tell that kind of story around it, then the actual engagement number itself means effectively nothing, right? So I think it's a skill that people need to, really build up in how they tell that story.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's a great way to wrap this. I think we're out of time here. Thank you for answering that. And for all the questions that we had, Erica, Brian, once again, thank you for sharing all of your insights and expertise. It was great having you today.
It was a pleasure.
If anybody wants to hear more of Erica and Brian, I think Brian dropped the link to their pod up above. There's some really great episodes in there. So I'd encourage you to go check them out. We will be sharing the recording of the webinar by email. If you have any follow-up questions, just hit reply on that email and let us know. And we've also dropped a survey link in the chat, and would really appreciate it if everybody would take a minute to give us your feedback. Erica, Brian, any final thoughts?
No, thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, fun.
Thank you for being here.
Right.
And thank you everyone for attending.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye, guys.